Hey, Dr. Connie.
Hello, Leslie. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, very good.
All right. So, is our last part of this three-part series that we've been doing, all about your personal story for our audience to get to know you a little bit more, but also to hopefully help them gain some more insight into their own personal journey by seeing themselves in your story, because we've been talking about a lot of different aspects that influence healing that most conventional practitioners don't always talk about. So, just as a review, and for anybody listening, if you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2, I recommend going back to that. Part 1 was all about relationships and their effect on health, and part 2 was all about different healing modalities that Dr. Connie personally tried on her healing journey. And so today we're going to get a little bit deeper into those modalities, talking more about the integration, because you did a lot of things, Dr. Connie. You also got a lot of degrees and certifications in an effort to help you learn more about your own healing, right? And
Yep.
so I want to talk more about that and how you actually found a way to utilize that in your own life.
Mhm. Well, I think I have been struggling with my health for a while now, over 20 years, and recently it got really bad post-COVID. And I just want to say that there are so many things out there, and I really recognize, and I think you and I did too, like at the time we were offering treatment options for our patients online. There was this big epiphany in my mind about, oh my gosh, everybody, when I'm sick, I'm always looking for the solution outside of me.
Mhm.
The biggest thing, number one thing that we all look to, you know this from being a nutrition major and a degree from it, is that we look to food. We think it's a
Yep.
diet. We need to fix our diet. Oh yeah, we need to eat better. I need to cut that out. And we think it's the food is the problem. But I think more and more, as I got sick and as I tried to apply all the modalities, including functional medicine, nutrition, and physical therapy and chiropractic, all the holistic modalities that I learned as well as try to get from the outside, I realized that your state of being happens on the inside, that it wasn't necessarily the food. You have to ask yourself, why am I not, or why am I having sensitivities to all these foods and having a inflammatory reaction to them
Mhm.
rather than thinking it's the food? So I think there's a lot of assumptions being made there. And, what we do is so much deeper than that.
Right. Yep. And we'll definitely get into that. So
Yeah.
I wanted to get started by talking about your studies. And from what I've heard from you, everything was very dogmatic. So you studied psychology, you studied nutrition, and then physical therapy. When you were working as an RD, you could only talk about food, right? And then when you were working as a PT, there was no talk about food allowed, only movement. So can you expand on that a little bit and how, why that doesn't work?
Yeah. So I think what I recognized was there is what's called a scope of practice within any discipline. And it's almost like we do things to protect our own, scope, if you will. And dietitians cannot infringe into physical therapy, and physical therapy can't talk about nutrition because I'm not a dietitian. But yet, we all move, we all eat every single day. And so, oh, and by the way, you can't give mental advice, like psychological advice for somebody, even with a psych degree. But from the work that we do together, that so much of the eating behavior and your willingness to do things for yourself as well as to exercise comes from your mindset. So
Mhm.
unless we tackle that, it doesn't work. But yet in the medical system, everything is considered interdisciplinary, right? Not everything is considered, but they have what's called interdisciplinary team. Like, for example, in the hospital, there's the pharmacist that comes to the meeting, there is the attending physician, and then whatever specialty physician that is required, as well as occupational therapy, physical therapy, registered dietitian, all the nurses, we come together to talk about the patient care.
Mhm.
Yet everybody stays in their own lanes. We're expected to do so. So we're almost like, I don't know, tearing apart this patient, and we have a piece of it. Like I'm in charge as a registered dietitian, just their food portion, physical
Right.
therapist, their movement, right? And then
Yeah.
medical doctor overall, and then nurses day to day, like, and pharmacy medications. So like
Mhm.
you and I both know it doesn't work that way.
Mhm. Right. I'm
Like,
sure it's
work.
yeah, it's easier for things to fall through the cracks when there's so many parts and pieces, right?
For sure. For sure. And I realized that our bodies and our health is kind of like the puzzle, right? But it's a complicated puzzle. It's got a lot of pieces to it. It's just, if we don't know what the puzzle, when it's completed, looks like, the complete piece of what the picture of the puzzle is supposed to look like, how do we know to solve that puzzle, right? But yet, it's almost like we look for the missing piece of the puzzle to get the solution to solving the puzzle. So it's like you're not looking at the whole puzzle, but you're looking at the pieces of it. And I'm
Mhm.
sitting here arguing over why this is so important and why this is wrong. And if you fix this and put this piece in, well, guess what? The puzzle is still not solved. You have to put everything back together in as a whole for the puzzle to come together, right?
Mhm.
Our bodies work that way biochemically, psychologically, mindfully, emotionally, physically. All things have to align. And that's sort of the premise of, okay, unless the patient, myself in this situation, in my own experience, is if I wasn't enrolled in my own wellness and I wasn't taking responsibility, but yet I still look to Leslie, give me nutritional advice. You know, I might look to the doctor for functional medical advice and go to the yoga class and that yoga teacher to provide me with the right movements. Like, I'm never going to be whole. I'm always
Mhm.
dependent, making a circle, yet not really getting well. And I'm always going to be looking for the next best thing. And
Right.
it's what we want to get away from.
Mhm. Yeah. And by looking at just the body parts, there's got to be some things that are missed, right? And I think you experience this personally, like culture, relationships, feelings. Can you talk a little bit more about what gets left out of the puzzle?
Yeah. So I think when we focus so much on the diet, and let's say, for example, like you and I both know, we have very different diets to begin with. You have very different cultural backgrounds. As with my Korean culture, we've introduced each other to a lot of new variety, right? That you've never
Mhm.
experienced before.
Right.
Well, my food is my comfort. It's my memory. It's my culture. It's my identity. Everything. It speaks to me. It's the emotional comfort that I receive from it. It's the mental security that I receive from it. It's also the nourishment because it provides me with those feelings, and everything is aligned to have this food. And so what I recognized was, just to give you a context of this, like I started to eliminate all foods probably about 15 years ago. And went on this elimination diet, and I got food sensitivity testing, which I found out I was sensitive to everything under the sun. Never did any practitioner of functional medicine talk to me about my own family, my own feelings, my own thoughts, my family. They were looking at me with a host of different labs, and they're just numbers, right? It's just a picture in time of my biochemistry. And they were leading me with that to tell me you're allergic to or sensitive to all these foods. And they used very scientific language like IgG versus IgE. And I had what's called IgG. I won't go into that here, but I was like, oh my gosh, I need to
Mhm.
learn this. This is fascinating because it's so scientific. And that's
Right.
when I went into it. Fast forward to today, 15 years, as you and I both know, I eat pretty much everything that I've taken away. And our ultimate goal in coaching our patients is to introduce all the foods, but change who they are on the inside so that we change their state of being before we even focus on the doing. Because when your nervous system is out of balance, everything you eat, it's going to cause an inflammation, because stress causes a lot of inflammation, and we think stress, adrenal fatigue, all the things, but never mind all the fancy language. It's when our autonomic nervous system, our fight or flight division of our autonomic nervous system, not the common Zen, is always on fire, even though there's no life threat. There is no threat to my life, but I'm always anxious. I'm always worried. Why? Because I'm always thinking about what the worst case scenario, we call that autonomic negative thoughts, right?
Mhm.
Or what's happened yesterday that I'm mulling over. And it's that rumination that gets me so fired up. And I'm in this state of fight or flight, even though there's no death threat to me. And
Right.
realize unless you regulate that from the inside, no amount of food, no amount of supplements, no amount of exercise will heal you. And it doesn't matter how much money you spend. It's going to be futile. Nobody can help you unless you regulate. And the doctors can't do it short of giving you numbing medication that's very toxic to your brain and your body. And so you have to learn to regulate it. And that's really the essence and the integration piece that we're missing today in the healthcare system.
Yeah, I think you explained that very well. And you said yourself that this is what you personally experienced. The doctors never asked you about any of that. So can you talk a little bit more about like when you made that connection and what did you realize was the underlying issue that was likely perpetuating your symptoms?
Yeah. So Leslie, as you know, like ever since I got my doctorate in physical therapy and I got married quickly, I was married for about 10 years, about a decade. And I knew my marriage was very up and down, up and down. And I thought that was the norm. And in my culture, it's you, once you're married, you know, once you make the bed, you have to sleep on it. And so divorce was so shameful for my family name and the culture. I didn't want the scarlet A. So I thought if I can only do better, right? And so my first experience with functional medicine was I had low libido because my relationship with my spouse at the time was not good. But I wanted to seek some help because it was becoming a real problem. And so when I went, she did a couple of tests. It's called single nucleotide polymorphism, which I mentioned in, I think, the previous episode. But also she tested my hormones because when I came in with the complaint of libido, she just tackled the sexual hormones. And she said that women of my age, I would need a little bit of testosterone and progesterone. This is bioidentical pathway because that's what stirs up a lot. So as you can see, the problem was sexual intimacy and low libido. And so the doctor compartmentalized my problem as that. I realized after being on that for a while and doing multiple tests and supplements and elimination diet, nothing was better. And then I started to go deep into really pondering my direction in life because I knew if I kept living this way, I would be a bad example to my boys because I'm condoning something that wasn't sitting right because there was a lot of verbal and there was just a lot of things that wasn't very healthy in my relationship. So I decided to seek deeper inner understanding because I wasn't sure if I was ready for the divorce. So I went and enrolled in yoga teacher training program, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was Ashtanga yoga. It's 8 limbs of yoga, and it's 8 limbs, and Ashtanga means 8. And I just took onto it because it was so physically challenging that I wanted to be, I wanted something that I can grasp that was beyond myself, right? And so that's when I really tackled yoga in this way. And through that process of that yoga teacher training and me being tested, challenged, triggered by this yoga teacher, I really started to reflect upon my tendencies and my behaviors and my thoughts and my feelings.
Okay.
I don't know what it was, Leslie, but something stirred me up enough to decide to essentially honor myself and decide that this marriage no longer served me. And at the time, I was very dependent on my social network and I was a people pleaser. And I realized later on that people pleasing is actually a trauma response.
Hmm.
And I wanted acceptance from my parents. I wanted acceptance from his parents. I wanted acceptance from my church members, everybody. So I was fearful, and my friends. And so I remember portraying something that I wasn't, acting like I was happy as long as I'm miserable on the inside and all the conflict was behind closed doors, I can keep it up. And then something just awakened me on the inside to realize this isn't going to work. And so I cut off all my friends and family and everybody else, and I was able to do it alone, and then started my path to healing. And it was through yoga.
Okay. And so after you did end the marriage, did you see a significant improvement in your health?
Absolutely. I had so much gut issues at the time. And as I was, as I wanted to seek more yoga, I had so much gas and bloating. And it was so uncomfortable that as I met new people, I feared that if I can ever have a romantic partner again, because it was that embarrassing, right?
Mhm.
And I remember I tackled it from a standpoint of really working on myself and really doing the yoga in a different way, to really not as an exercise routine to like just get fit and toned,
Mhm.
but it was really a reflective time. And I got into the understanding the 8 limbs, as well as the pranayams, and then the asana practices, how it can be a moving meditation. I didn't know it back then, but that's the significant help it gave me to have this inner peace and knowing that I was doing the right thing. Now, granted, I had no backing. I had no idea what the future will look like. I was scared. I mean, I was so scared of the future, but I knew I can handle it. And I don't know what gave me that strength other than just the inner knowing that this was my path. This was the right thing to do. And that was one of those moments.
Mhm. Yeah. And from what I've heard, not only did your health improve, but you started to cultivate healthier relationships,
Yeah.
right? And look at your own desires as opposed to what you said earlier, people pleasing and meeting everybody else's needs, right?
Yeah. So as you know, partial story is I realized you asked me if my health improved after this. Yes, it did. Over time, I was completely void of any symptoms, any issues, right?
Mhm.
And I had to redefine my relationship with myself. But, that doesn't come easy, right? I didn't even realize that that's what I needed to do. But I knew that I needed to shield myself from the opinions of my family, opinions of my friends, opinions of our church members. And I had to get over the shame of it all and the guilt that I carried. And I knew that was the beginning. But I mean, let me tell you, it wasn't easy. But I began to really shield myself. And it was complete avoidance initially, Leslie, because I didn't know how to set boundaries. All I knew was I wasn't the same person on the other side of this that I
Right.
was before. I was people pleasing, always saying yes, yes to everything. But
Mhm.
now I started to really look into, do I really want this or do
Mhm.
I not? And then I became a little bit more vocal, and that wasn't met with friendly smiles from my family and my friends. It was, what's wrong with you? You see what I mean? So
Mhm.
those are things I think you and I both experience with our patients as well. As they awaken to themselves, they start to inadvertently start to shield themselves. And it's like there's phases of this growth and healing that occurs, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of what happened to me. And that's
Mhm.
how I found my own self.
Mhm. Yeah. I think some of our patients have a hard time grasping the concept of being versus doing, but what you just said is exactly it. It's how are you showing up in your life, right? How are you showing up in certain circumstances? How are you reacting to certain circumstances, right?
Yeah. And you and I talk about this all the time. It's like that. Don't be locked into or be a hostage to the past, and don't project into the future what you're bringing from the past. You have to sort of reset and like start from possibilities of really letting go of your past and just being here and now. And that means it's the hardest thing that you can do, because there's so many subconscious programming underlying all the beliefs that we had. And you and I went through this, like, doctors know best. And who am I to say, right? And then we got treating our patients, realized, oh no, only the patients know best. Only we know ourselves the best. And healing can't even begin unless the self is, what's the word? The self is invested in them. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And there has to be that lock in before anything happens. That, you know, our role as health practitioners, you and I, we know, we always talk about this. We're just the guides to take them along and coach them along.
Right.
And it's the most, edifying experience to see patients transform who they are, right? From doing all the things to being, and, you know, unapologetically being who they are. And we see the biochemical changes over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great segue into your functional medicine practice, because when you were studying it, you noticed there was a lot of gaps still, right? You still had a lot of questions. It seems like everybody was just doing the testing just to do it. But you started to see a common thread in your patients, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So in functional medicine, we meet with different vendors, supplement vendors, meet other practitioners in the same field, and everybody speaks the same lingo. And I realized this is yet another dogmatic approach to things, right? Because we learn functional medicine and we practice functional medicine. What does that even mean, right? And so I began to see a pattern, and you and I did this for a long time, where we would test everything that the lab companies would come and tell us we needed for our patients to figure out the root cause of it all. And I realized time after time, no matter how many tests that we did, it was irrelevant once we found out the source of their issues. It wasn't really the biochemistry. Biochemistry will be off the cuff, like not terrible, but out of balance if their inner being is not being manifested properly. And so how do you pull that out in a way where we apply functional medicine to help them heal in that way? And you and I always joke that patients know we still get calls to say, hey, I'm looking for functional medical doctor. Can you do bioidentical hormones? Do you test food sensitivity? Do you do stool testing? Do you treat SIBO? But they don't understand that it's not that we treat. It's deeper than that, right? So we talked about just, earlier today about how the foundation of your house needs to be grounded. And if the foundation is not set, nothing else on top is going to matter. And so diet, exercise, all those things are good, healthy, quote unquote, behaviors. But if your state of being is one of toxicity, like constantly berating yourself, anxiety ridden, and it's something you have to do to keep a trim figure and keep that number on that scale, and you know that diet, you're on yet another diet, but it's full of deprivation and misery, that's when we realize that in itself is toxicity. That's not being healthy. And so I just realized that instead of doing all those things, first of all, we see the patient in front of us. And that is sort of emphasized in functional medicine, which I love. But another component is me as a patient started to ask the question, what does it mean? Does it mean I have to go see my doctor every 3 months and check my labs? What does it mean to be healed holistically? And unless I equip myself to do that, because the thermostat is in, right? So we talked about the example of super hot, your heater is broken, and your thermostat's on heat. I get so hot, and so I tell you, hey, let's bring out the fans, and let's turn on the fans on high, and that's the diet, right? Hoping that that would decrease the temperature. At first, that wind in the air, that might feel good, but after a while, the heat still stays. the thermostat control needs to be fixed. And that thermostat control can only be regulated by who? You, the person who has the symptoms. And I feel like that, I hope this locks in for a lot of people, that diet is secondary to you fixing and learning the thermostat set point. And I know sometimes you and I work together, Leslie, you tend to be a little bit more warm tempered. So our temperatures, you know how sometimes like you have to take off your sweatshirt when you're working with me because I like it a little bit warmer versus, you know what I mean? But you see how you're doing that, but we're in the same room. And we're able to create that balance because you know, oh, I'll just take off my shirt versus me, I'll just put on a shirt. How do I know that? How do you know that? That's something you know from the inside. I'm cold. I'm hot. Versus we expect the doctor to tell us I'm hot. I'm cold. Give me a medicine. Turn up the thermostat. Turn down the thermostat. Using hormones, food, all the things that is external. Really the problem is it's the system. And the system can only be regulated by yourself. I know I went too long.
No, that's a perfect way to explain that. I hope a lot of people get that as well. And just to make it clear, the foundation you're talking about that adjusts the thermostat, it's the thoughts, it's the feelings, it's the beliefs, and it's also the traumas, the conditioning from the past, right?
Yeah. And Leslie, one thing that I told you this, you know, my innermost secrets and my thoughts is that it wasn't until I realized my very identity that I held for myself was completely in malalignment. It wasn't aligned with who I truly was. The image of who I wanted to become, healthy and fit and all those things, while externally I may look the part, during the marriage, I didn't have that alignment because I would go home to a toxic environment where the constant fighting, the constant conflict was causing so much stress that it was causing so much inflammation in the body. And once I fixed that part of it, guess what, Leslie? I barely take any supplements. I barely go on a diet. Like my body is able to regulate so much better. And really that's the heart message that and hope that we want to give to everybody listening here.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to talk a little bit about, I think there was a huge turning moment for you where you really discovered some of these deeper inner wounds that you had, right? And you know what I'm talking about, 2019. So can you share a little bit about that?
So as you recall, in 2019, early 2019, I started to get really anxious. Well, to go back a little bit, to give you context, I was at a dinner table, and at the time, my mom was helping me a lot with my two boys, both of them in high school, one in, oh no, not both of them, one in high school, one in middle school. So I had a full household, and then I had a business in Swanee, and you know how busy things were back then. I just was so busy. And I remember having a discussion. We were having dinner at the dinner table with my mom, and there were my two boys. And something she said triggered me in the deepest way. And it was when she labeled my older son a certain way and labeled my younger son a certain way. And that just flipped me over. And I got really angry at her. I started to yell at her, and I probably became very dramatic. I don't know where that came from. Needless to say, at that dinner table, my mom literally said, "You're not my daughter. Let's not talk anymore. Let's not see each other." And she just completely, we call it, disowned me and left my house. I was devastated at that time, but I was more mad, right? So time passed, and you know how things went. I had a busy schedule. I came to work every day, and I was anxious, and I was really, really stressed out because I don't know. I realized that my relationship with my mom has always been one of mommy dearest. I always wanted to just please her. And to have her disowned me, it just like, I don't know, floored me. And no matter how many times I called her a week after the week after that, and then it was pretty soon Mother's Day, she would just pick up and hang up on me. And literally I felt abandoned. And that pain, Leslie, I mean, you were there to witness some of the things that I was going through. I was seeing patients, but I wasn't well. I started to get this red malar rash that autoimmune patients get. It started to swell up. And then soon after that, I was admitted in the hospital. And in the hospital, the doctor said my white count was so low, I had an infection, but no white count. So neutropenia is what it's called. And so I couldn't eat anything that's potentially would give me any kind of infection. I was in an isolated room on a cancer patient floor. They did all kinds of antibiotics. And by the end of the first week, they said, get your affairs in order. I don't think she's going to make it. Because no matter what antibiotics they tried, my white count wouldn't go up, even after blood transfusions. And so finally, we turned the turning point and slowly started to things to come up. But they couldn't explain why my neutropenia. And so they thought I had either leukemia or aplastic anemia. And I was discharged with a port in my arm for antibiotic treatments that I had to dose every single day for, I don't know, 6 weeks. Do you remember that port I had in my arm?
Yeah.
So I operated like that. And I realized that your emotions and your thoughts, something traumatic like that, because that was really traumatic for me. I mean, if you knew me at the time for 6 weeks, my sister-in-law and my spouse will tell you I was beside myself. I was so panic-stricken that I would be motherless. And that brought me back to, I realized later on when we did further work, Leslie, you and I, and we were being coached, and I realized, oh my gosh, it was when my parents immigrated to the States when I was just 8 years old. We were left for 2 years. I don't have any memories from 8 to 10 and living in Korea. The conditions were bad and we were pretty much orphaned. And I used to pray at night, like thinking my parents would never come back. And that trauma came up for me. And I realized, oh my gosh, that can have that impact.
Yeah.
And fast forward, remember, Leslie, like a couple of months of rehab. And after, working out with my mom, setting more boundaries with my mom and just guarding myself, I was able to come back to full health. And I had this conversation with my hematologist at the time, who thought that I definitely had aplastic anemia or leukemia. And he said, power of the mind, what are you doing differently to get this kind of recovery? Yoga.
Right.
And positive mindset. And we always talk about that. It's not easy enough to do yoga to get positive mindset, you and I learned, but it's a lot of that introspective awareness and self-work that you have to do, right? It's not just about the meditation separate from the yoga. It's not diet separate from the exercise. It's all of it together. It's your career path. It's the stress from that and being aligned with who you are and really voicing what you want and being clear about that, your vision. And then also all your interpersonal relationship, most important being with yourself. And I realized I didn't honor myself at all. In fact, everybody else was more important. Remember going back to the first episode, Leslie, I always tell you this. My self-confidence was lower than 0 because I thought I was worthless. And so I always thought, I'm a fraud. If it's only a matter of time if they find out how much, what a worthless person I am, and I think I lived in that fear. It's almost like comes back from that 80-year-old girl having trauma of losing her parents and being abandoned because she's worthless. And I think that's the story that played out until I recognized, oh my gosh.
So realizing that really opened the door to more spiritual work, right? More coaching.
For sure. And without the coaches that we hired and that we learned from in the last 2 years, Leslie, I mean, you and I both agree, we're completely different people. Like, I feel like we go through and there's like, without a shadow of a doubt, there's a lot of inner conflicts and interpersonal relationship styles. Because I always thought I was a good communicator. Not after I got coached. There's patterns that come up. And I think, you and I working so closely together, you would agree that we worked out a lot of those kinks, but we were most importantly, we're able to be very transparent with each other and be honest in
Mhm.
a trusted relationship, to pull out our vulnerabilities and to really recognize what we're feeling in that moment.
Yeah.
And I think you and I both learned how to feel what we feel and be honest about them.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that has transformed our working relationship more than all the skills we could have learned and, right, everything
Yeah.
that we could do.
Yeah. And remember, for the first part of your internship, it was almost like, you know, how I was obsessed with learning more, knowing more, like all the things. And it flipped over to, wait a minute,
Mhm.
this is not right. Nothing else matters. And so our work in transforming and really healing our patients became such a flipped up method, right?
Mhm.
I mean, look at the lives we're changing together. We're pretty proud of ourselves, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's one of the most important things we do with our patients is helping them bring that awareness, right,
Yeah.
to the feelings
Yeah.
and the thoughts causing those feelings,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And once that's in alignment, then bring out our knowledge and the tools that we have regarding all the knowledge I have in functional medicine, regarding all the knowledge of the doing supplements and the yoga, physical therapy, all that is layered only on top of fixing that thermostat regulation that the patient learned to do on their own. Only
Mhm.
then can we truly equip them with this philosophy that you and I hold is self-healthcare system.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you briefly explain to our audience the experience, the integration, the coaching, and the community model that we use?
Yeah. Um, and I think in the context of health, a lot of people are reading a lot. They know a lot. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We've heard that before. We've seen that before, but we're really not experiencing it. A lot of people are on the fence because our minds don't absorb knowledge. Knowledge doesn't heal us. It doesn't go inside, right? Only
Right.
experience does. And so you and I have worked really hard in the last 2 years to create this experience where they can integrate, or not integrate, that's the second part, but experience the healing through practice of functional yoga medicine with all the tools that we provide them to regulate not only their nervous system, but in doing so to heal their gut through all the other modalities that we offer. And it becomes a comprehensive program. And then the second layer of that is to really integrate it in a way where now they're integrating this experience to understand the regulating mechanisms within them and integrating it into their nervous system. So now, you know, all the learned pattern behaviors and thoughts and emotions, they can be relearned and reintegrated within themselves so that they can be well on their way to self healing for life. And then the third component that we really focus on is where I think our masterpiece or our gifts lie, is our ability to really coach them through the obstacles and the blockages they will inevitably have on this journey. No
Mhm.
matter who you are, how much you know, how much you think you will hit blind spots, the limiting beliefs that you have. Limiting beliefs, that word is such a, I don't know, such a widely used word now, but to us, those limiting beliefs are so subconscious under the surface that unless we coach them through them, that they still continue to get stuck in their own patterns.
Mhm.
Last component of our program that it provides is the community of it all. How, you know, it's a lonely world when you start to be awakened to yourself because the friends no longer see you the same as the people pleaser typically, and you come out of it on the other side, so it can be a very lonely world. And that's where we have this separation and disintegration anxiety, to where
Mhm.
we want to revert back to the comfort level of being miserable again, because at least we have all the familiar surroundings with our friends. So I really felt and we saw this evidence of, the community aspect of it is so powerful because that's where they can come to get support, to gain understanding, insights, accountability, and all the things. It's a safe place for them to be themselves as they come through. And we've seen some lifelong friendships develop out of that. And it's a bond that you don't want to ever lose, because you almost are connected to the higher elevated states of being. And once we get triggered out there, it's so easy for us to revert back to our own old patterns, but this guarantees them that they don't do that.
Yep. And I think that's why our clients have been so successful, right?
Yeah, because they choose to stay on. And I always say, they're amazing because they keep doing the work. And this is not a one pill, or it's not an easy pill to swallow just once. And these are the clients who are looking for the, pill for every ill approach. They've tried pretty much everything under the sun: acupuncture, holistic medicine, chiropractic, traditional Chinese medicine, supplements, diet, you name it. And they haven't gotten better because they were focused so much on the doing and never addressing the thermostat regulator that lies within themselves.
Right.
I think that's the big, huge difference.
Yes. So I want to close this up with your advice for people who are listening who haven't yet worked with us and who are just coming to terms with all of this deeper work, because they too have been focusing on the doing. What would you recommend for them to start this inner healing journey?
I truly believe yoga, our type of yoga, not any other vinyasa, foo-foo-y type of yoga, but our type of yoga is the most effective way to not only lose weight, get rid of aches and pains, and heal your gut and stay well for life. This is going to be the best entryway into sort of what we're all about and how this applies to you. And unless you lock in and really regulate from inside out, everybody says heal from the inside out. That seems such like a, it's been cliche. Thank you. But I just want to say you have to regulate from the inside out. It's not something that other people can press your buttons, because if you let them do that and look for another solution outside of you, you're always going to be game for yet another book, yet another expert, yet another diet or exercise even. So a way to be unstoppable, unshakable.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you, Dr. Connie. Is there any last words that you want to leave everybody with?
No, I just want to encourage everybody to check us out and subscribe to our Mind Your Health podcast, and where they can find a lot more information about what we do and how we do things differently, as well as to, grow and heal themselves just by listening to our podcast.
Yes. And in addition to the podcast, follow us on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, all at Dr. Connie Cheung. We'll put those links below in the show notes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, Dr. Connie.